Hey guys, what we're doing today is we're starting to look at the coursework. So for South Africa, you have an exam which you will sit potentially at the end of year 13, who knows though. And the other component that we're going to do for South Africa is the coursework. So you've got 20% of the exam, and then the coursework is also worth 20% of your entire A level. So it's quite a substantial amount of the A level. And I think if you work really hard in your coursework and you get it up to scratch so that you do really well in it, it just gives you a comfort going into the exam that you've already kind of banked that result, that mark, and we'll tell you as soon as we've marked and moderated it and sent it off what result you get. So it's a very reassuring thing to do. It is going to be 4,000 words, which obviously seems like quite a lot, but you'll actually probably find that that's not enough words at all. One of the things that this year found hardest for this was about trying to cut it down from 5,000 to 4,000 because they just had so much to say in the same way that you would have a lot to say. So I know that this seems daunting at first, but it's something that you guys with such strong opinions and strong views of South African history, you're just going to excel in. It's actually just a chance for you to be historians and just to write and give your interpretation on South Africa. So essentially, what is the purpose of the coursework? So the coursework is a study of historiography. So historiography is the study of the writing of history and written histories. So it's essentially about looking at what has been written about South Africa, critically analysing what's been written about South Africa, and then offering your own opinion of that. So you're essentially getting historians to engage and argue with each other about what caused the end of apartheid in South Africa. So what this is going to do for you is it's about developing your skills in analysis and the evaluation of interpretations. So that's looking at essentially, in terms of analysing the interpretation, it's about breaking the interpretation down into little bits and trying to work out firstly, what is their view on what caused the end of apartheid, but also how they form that view. What is it about that historian that caused them to have that opinion? So when we were looking at Herschen, for example, what made state retaliation useless, his interpretation, because he's a Marxist historian, is all about the economy. It's all about the workers rather than the idea. So the focus of the interpretation in terms of the background of the author and the beliefs of the author or the historian end up informing what the historian actually says. So what are the relationships between the interpretations and the questions that they answer, and what's the legitimacy in different interpretations? If, for example, De Bow writes an entire interpretation about the ANC and he's arguing that the ANC caused the end of apartheid, is that a legitimate view in the sense that with his interpretation, does he actually look at the role of black consciousness? Does he look at the role of the labour movement? Does he look at the role of the individual leaders within apartheid South Africa as well? So it's about weighing up what's good and what's bad about the different interpretations. It's also a focus to help you understand the nature and purpose of the work of the historian. So what is it that historians do, and what does that look like, and how can we analyse and critique it? So it's about forming a critical view in that sense and explain, analyse and evaluate the interpretation of a minimum of 3 historians. So you're going to have 3 core interpretations, but also mention other ones too, which I'll talk about more in a sec. So essentially, the question then, it is historians have disagreed about something with reference to 3 chosen works, analyse the ways in which the interpretations of the questions, problem or issue differ, explain the difference you have identified, evaluate the arguments indicating which one you found most persuasive, and it should include supplementary readings. So you're going to have 3 core interpretations. Those interpretations are entirely up to you. I'm going to give you a reading pack which will help you form your judgment in terms of the interpretations you're going to use. But you can also research additional interpretations too. You just have to send it to me first so that I can just clear that it's a good interpretation to use. So for example, you could use these 3 interpretations here. So historians have disagreed about what caused the end of apartheid. With reference to 3 chosen works, can you explore that issue. So if I was to look at Guillaume, his interpretation is going to be very much about the actions of the Afrikaner leaders as a driving force for change. Then you're going to have De Boer, and he's going to focus on solely the role of the ANC and how important the ANC were in causing the end of apartheid. And then you can have Gerhardt, who's going to argue it's about the sort of mobilization of ideas and young people. So, essentially, what you would have to do is you would choose your three interpretations, and you would use supplementary reading to affirm or challenge the core interpretations. So you might talk about the Gerhardt interpretation about Black Power in South Africa, and you could use the Hirschman interpretation, which we used a few lessons ago, and say how he challenges this view. So it's about not just using these three interpretations, but using other interpretations to show that you've got a wide understanding of the history and the different views within that history too. So that's why I've given you so many interpretations to read throughout this entire year. So all of those interpretations that I've given you are useful. So I would recommend collating your notes and seeing which bits are good for talking about the end of apartheid. And also the reading pack that I'm going to give you is also really crucial for this, because it just gives you a more breadth version of the interpretations. So our question focuses, why did apartheid end? So this is just an example of what I do when I'm planning an essay. I just essentially write down all the different factors that I can think of. So you only need to think about 3 factors, and I've obviously got more than that here. So let's say, for example, we were looking at the reasons for the end of apartheid. And one of the reasons, which we will look at in more detail soon, is boycotts. So the role of international pressure, the cultural isolation, the economic pains of that, as well as the military support for the ANC, receiving support from Cuba and the USSR. The role of the ANC. The ANC were crucial in the end of apartheid because they acted as a legitimate government in waiting. So they were an alternative because they talked about racialism, advocated in their Freedom Charter. So Mandela ends up becoming the safer option. So it's kind of, we need to try and take control of this collapse of apartheid and try and put a government that's not going to advocate black supremacy, whatever that means. Was it economic drivers? Was it because of the role of the trade unions? Was it the mental revolution? So the ANC actually weren't that significant because they rode the wave of black consciousness. They benefited from Soweto. And then obviously the National Party, the fact that they begin to split, the fact that their reforms are inadequate meant that apartheid was doomed to fail. So these are just some different ideas, but it's a really important thing that you do, that you just kind of sit down and you write down all of the factors that you think caused the end of apartheid. What we're going to do when we go into school is we're going to have a week when you're in school, and we'll probably have a double lesson. I'm a bit disappointed in how short the amount of time we're going to have in school is, to be honest. But essentially, what we'll do during that double is I'm going to do a quick whistle-stop tour for the end of apartheid. So I'm going to essentially set you up so that you have the historical context in order to answer these questions. So we're going to do that, and then it's important that once you've done that, you think about all the different factors and you just write down notes about what you think was important, what were the different interpretations, and so forth. So it's so important that you organise your reading, and you do that from day one. From the moment you pick up a book and you read it, you do it properly, you write your notes properly. I actually do this with every book that I read, because I never know if that book's going to be useful later. So I really recommend this. So this is like a book that I read for my dissertation for my MA. And you can see the first thing that you might notice at the top is I've put the reference there. And I've not just written Sewell, keep on moving. I've actually put the correct reference in there. And referencing is really, really important. It has to be done in the correct way. So surname of author, initial, title, publisher, where it was published, and the year it was published as well. So you can see that there. And you can see on my notes, I've also put, whenever I'm writing my notes, I've typed them because it's just easier to be to search them if they're typed, or if you're doing it on an on an iPad, Good Notes is good because you can search the text. So essentially, I've put in the notes that I was writing from the book, and I've put where I found that too. So I've referenced page numbers throughout, and that way I can easily go back to this work and complete it. And know basically where I got the ideas from. It helps with planning too. So organize yourself now so you can love yourself later. So your summer homework is going to be about reading and taking notes from the reading pack I'm going to give you when you're in school, but it's also available as a PDF if you prefer to do it on your iPad. It's up to you essentially. So this is the issue too. It's about choosing good works. So these good works need to be substantial. They can't be a couple of pages. It needs to be at least an article, so sort of about 20 pages, or the length of a chapter. So when I say reading Debeau A and C, you don't have to read the entire book, but you would have to read at least a chapter from that. And you'll find that when you do history, you don't sit down and read an entire history book. You actually read the chapters from it. You don't read the whole thing. So you wouldn't have to read the entire book. It needs to be created by a historian. So books, articles, audiovisual are okay too, as long as you reference them properly and as long as I approve them first. There needs to be a range of views or emphasis that must be sufficiently different. So this is the other reason why I need to confirm your free interpretations that you use. You don't want to end up using 3 interpretations that kind of have the same view, because you won't be able to talk about their disagreement. The coursework question is not interested in how much Guillemy and Debeau agree. It doesn't actually care. You won't get any marks for that. The marks that you get is from highlighting that Debeau is focusing on the ANC causing the end of apartheid, and Guillemy is focusing on the role of the Afrikaner leaders. So he's having a more individualistic perspective, whereas Debeau is looking at the role of an organisation. So you need to be able to do that analysis and focus on how these things are different. So crucial too, you need to keep a record. So this sheet here is actually your reading record. So we need to submit this along with your coursework, because it just makes it's part of the exam board ensuring that you don't cheat and stuff like that. I've already made this onto a Google Doc, so you'll be able to edit it as you go. And it means that you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your iPad, your computer. It's just a lot easier to do it. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill in this reading record as you're reading. So you can see on the left, it says resources used. This is where you reference it properly, and I've put a link on how to do that on the Google Doc for you. So just make sure that you're referencing it in the same way that I referenced that work that I showed you a moment ago. So in terms of page, just making sure that if you're reading a chapter, you put, and the chapter's page 5 to 30, you're making sure you're putting that there. So you do PP, full stop, 5 to 30. Student comments is where you're essentially writing what it was that you got from that interpretation. It's almost kind of like a summary of what that interpretation tells you about that question. Again, this needs to be done as you're going along, because if you're thinking about next year when we're submitting the coursework, you're going to be quite stressed with exams, you're going to be stressed with revision and things like that, and if you're doing other subjects that do coursework, you'll be stressing with that. So if you leave this to then, you're going to do it badly, and it is really time consuming. But if you do it as you go along, it really won't take you that long. So it's so crucial that you do that, so just keep on top of it. And essentially I wanted to show you as well what the reading pack looked like. So this is it as a PDF, which I will give you a link to, but I am printing hard copies for you as well, and I'm going to make sure that they're printed and then left alone for a week so they're not contaminated and things like that. So your summer pack looks like this. I've put a summary and some questions about the exam where I can, about the text, where I can. So just to tell you what it's about. So for Akala natives, we're actually going to do this as reading in a couple of weeks, because he just gives a very good interpretation. He won't be one of your free interpretations, unfortunately, but he can be a supplementary reading, and he's a really powerful interpretation, so it's really good to use. So I put some questions there to help you, and a recommendation. So for this one, it's about reading the whole chapter because it's really good. And I've also got I've also recorded the audio for it too. Not me, Akala, I just screen recorded his recording. But you've essentially got your interpretation there. And then for other ones, I've put like a summary, like this one here is a focus on the nature of human rights and different political systems. So if you want to focus on things like human rights, this is a good one to read. It's also good for politics students too, in terms of the introduction. So yeah, sometimes I just put a small part of an interpretation as well, if I feel that that's the only bit that's relevant, because that might be good for a supplementary reading. So just have a look through this and see what you think. And if you have any questions, just let me know.